Hello YouTube, welcome to the Educated Barbarian. Today we are going to be speaking about Nietzsche and his relationship with God. There are many misconceptions around this topic, and therefore I have prepared a structured analysis and expose on the very question of religion within Nietzschean philosophy, because you will have heard, if you have any interest in the topic, that Nietzsche hates God, that Nietzsche is anti-religion, etc. And that couldn't be further from the truth. This truly shows that many people don't get Nietzsche because they don't read him properly or they just skip passages altogether. So today, I want to actually show to you that not only did Nietzsche not hate God or religion, he saw a reason for its existence. What he deplored and what he disliked was what religion became afterwards. So, we are going today to be talking about that very fact. What happened to religion that Nietzsche started to actually detest its very existence. For this particular idea, I have to present a triptych. So there's a trinity of videos that I actually wrote for you guys. For the first one, we are going to focus on what religion used to be, what faith and conscience used to be. Then we're going to be talking in part 2 about how it started to devolve, the mechanisms of the devolution of evolution. And then in the third part, we're going to be talking about the post-religion world, the world that we live in. But there are going to be constant themes throughout these videos, so you will be able to follow them properly. Now, I must say this. These videos are made in particular for religious people. So if you believe in God and you're the type that stood away and shied away from reading Nietzsche because you thought that he was just constantly attacking your beliefs, I firmly encourage you to watch this video until the end, because I'm going to prove you that one, it's wrong, and two, if you follow the same mindset that Nietzsche had, it might actually reinforce your religion, reinforce your belief in God. And if you're an atheist, I also encourage you to watch this video, because you might come to understand that your atheism is in reality the creation of what used to be religion that devolved to the point that you now have entered a stage of existence that Nietzsche describes as even worse than religion itself when it degenerates. So let's get into it. If you remember, last week we ended on the new philosophers, a caste of men that would develop the ability to see beyond morals and therefore access truth. That type of man is absolutely necessary for the task that Nietzsche had in mind. That task was to trace back the origins of religions to be able to understand why we became what we are today. How can we understand religion to such a level that we're able to witness exactly where it went wrong? Because I'm certain that even if you believe in God, you are witnessing nowadays a certain level of destruction of the religious ideal, regardless of the religion, but especially if you're Christian. And you're going to see today that we're going to mainly focus on Christianity, because Nietzsche is a European philosopher, and therefore he focused mainly on Catholicism and the Protestants. Now, he himself was one of these new philosophers that was willing to go where no soul has wandered. And the thing with that type of person is that they are scarce and you wouldn't really be able to find them where you think you could. For example, if I told you, hey, we're going to explore the history of religion, what could you tell me? What type of person is the most fitting? Well, maybe someone who knows a lot about theology or who has a degree in religious studies, right? Well, the problem with that type of people is that, as Nietzsche says, even though they might be required, the second the big hunt commences, they are utterly useless, because the second they are faced with morals or with the necessity to question things that are pre-established or that the court tells them is not questionable, they become completely incapable to go forward. They are like a dog that would be tracking a great beast, but the second it actually catches its scent, it stops on its tracks. The dog is completely useless for that type of hunt. Therefore, scholars who are otherwise serviceable for other aspects of life, like science, tend to buckle at the knee when faced with what Nietzsche calls hominus religiosi, the religious man, or in reality the religious kind, the religious species, the type of person that tends to be quite, widespread in the world. There are many people who are religious men. But the thing is that they themselves are not very capable of questioning their own self, because it's very tough to look at yourself in the mirror. And the people outside of it, even the atheists, don't like to really touch on that topic. You will notice that even people who don't believe in God, when they attack religion, they don't really dive deep into it. They don't actually look at the particularities. They attack it broadly or they ridicule it. Their goal is not to truly prove that God doesn't exist or that religion is stupid. They're just trying to just disprove it outright, and they don't need arguments for that. So even they are completely useless. If we are to observe the problems of knowledge and conscience throughout the evolution of mankind, we have to recruit a different breed of men, and that breed is, again, the new philosophers. Because to face humanity's great dangers, you need people who are willing, again, to endure its dangers. And why are knowledge and conscience at the center of human existence, and why is it so dangerous to question them? Well, because if you question these things, you question the very essence of what being a human is. You go back to our genesis, in a sense, and what started to make us civilized, and you question the tenets of said civilization. What happens if you find out that they are faulty? It's like living in a house and you don't really want to check the basement because you think to yourself, man, what if I find out that the basement is shaky? Now I have to live within my head the knowledge that the house is going to fall apart, or might have already fallen apart on me and I haven't noticed yet. This is why it is so scary to face our inner demons, to face the demons of mankind. But it's absolutely vital if we are to understand ourselves. So, to observe the history of religions, one needs a profound and bruised intellectual, so the two, and an intellectual conscience that goes with it. So, I think I just repeated myself. Sorry, I was confused for a second. So, I think that the most important part here is not the profound. The profound just means that you have an ability to attain and to explore deep concepts. The bruised is the one I want to focus on, because what does it mean exactly? It means that this intellectual conscience has tried its hand at this task before and got burnt. It has tasted the poison that dwells, I think, deep within the human heart, deep within the human condition. And with that conscience, you also have to have a wicked spirituality, because if you are to break the taboos, if you are to explore the darkness, you need to be able to have, again, an ability to float above morals, to not be restricted by them. And if you have one and not the other, it's not going to help you much, because you could be extremely intelligent, but if there are areas of discourse that you just refuse to engage in because you see them as either too politically incorrect or too taboo, then you are not of much use. And if you are just someone who's wicked spiritually but with no intelligence, you're going to be a clown. You're going to be, again, the type of person that is just going to ridicule things but without an ability to actually extract knowledge from said things. So it's a rare combination of traits that is scarcely found. But if you attain these traits, you will float far above the mass that Nietzsche, again, regards with such disdain because they lack those two qualities. And by flying above the mass, you have a clear view of it. So it's much easier to observe behaviors. And I would even go as far as to say that if we are to look at the theory that stipulates that one that could travel back in time would have the ability to move at the speed of light, if you are to be able to separate yourself from the earth, to a certain degree, you will be able to see in the past as well. You will be able to perceive what the history of mankind has led us to. And that is very important, because we cannot rely on academics. As Nietzsche said, one must do everything oneself in order to know something, meaning that one has much to do. This applies to the topic of religion, this applies to life in reality. If you want to know something, you cannot rely on other people's knowledge. You have to acquire it yourself. And to me, I see that as the desperate call of a man who wished he could have used the help of his contemporaries to explore this dark area of the human conscience, but just came up empty-handed because no one was up to the task, so he had to do it himself. He had to, again, take on his back all of the punishments that await someone who openly criticizes religion with a pure heart, which usually, again, doesn't happen quite often. So let us see what Nietzsche has to say. Let's give him the benefit of the doubt. He is taking a great risk, and that should be rewarded with attentiveness. So, according to the author, faith as it was originally, so such as desired by early Christianity, was not that sincere and austere slave faith that appeared afterwards. So, within Christianity itself, the concept of faith evolved. That is very important to keep in mind because I'm going to repeat that throughout the entire segment. Back in the days, at its infancy, what faith was is described as a continuous suicide of reason. So, one, it was repetitive. Faith was not something set in stone, unquestionable and unmoving, and it was something that was seen as almost a self-mutilating practice. You were doing something to yourself that, according to the laws of nature, made no self. You constantly killed your own reason. It sounds negative at first, but we're going to get to a point where I'm going to explain to you why it's not, and why Nietzsche didn't think that it was. This type of faith is a choice. It's a choice, already that's important, it's a choice. Faith couldn't be imposed on you. You had to decide to explore faith and to accept it. And it's a choice made in opposition with our most basic instincts. So you have the primal instincts that every human has, and then you have faith. And faith tends to go directly against everything that humans want to do, naturally. Does it mean that it's a bad thing? No, you could immediately infer that it's a good thing. Faith works as a restriction, as a set of restrictions that are going to bring discipline into the life of a human. And that faith, again, needs to be constantly reaffirmed like any type of disciplines. If you don't actually try it day in and day out, then it is just going to wither away and die. Because, and it's something that every single disciplined person knows, the self regularly attempts to revolt from this subjection. We don't particularly like to have restrictions as humans, especially if it restricts things that align with our instinct. Even worse if these are instincts driven by the pursuit of pleasure, which, as you know, if you are someone who is faithful to a god or religion, tends to be the case. Your faith encourages you to stay away from instantaneous pleasures and all of the gratuitous gratification that comes with it. So, if we are to define faith as the way it was intended to be back then, it was the sacrifice of all freedom, all pride, all self-confidence of spirit. But it's a sacrifice that paid back, meaning that you were giving up something in hope of getting something in return. It didn't mean that you were completely empty of all pride or freedom or confidence. It made that you sacrificed a portion of it, for the most part, because it was giving you a different version, if you will. It's the equivalent of putting an apple in a machine and it gives it back to you covered with chocolate. But the thing is that when you put the apple in the machine, you have no guarantee that it's going to actually give you something back. That is faith. That is the way it was seen in the past. Meaning that it was also a very, very cruel concept. Faith is not nice. Nowadays, we have the vision of faith as something cuddly and almost pink. When I think of faith, I think of yellow and pink. Why? These are positive colors, they are vibrant colors. But faith in reality should be dark. It should be purple, it should be red. Because it is the infliction upon the self of very painful practices. Because it subjects the soul to much fastidiousness, with the explicit intent of being painful to a spirit which suffers from the absurdest exercise. If you look again at faith as discipline, anyone who is disciplined will tell you that discipline is pain. If you want to discipline yourself, you have to endure pain. But why do you endure that pain? Because it prevents you from suffering a different, greater type of pain, the pain of regrets, of not achieving anything, of lying to yourself. It is the same for faith. Faith is the willing acceptation of a cruel treatment from the self to the self for the benefit of the self, with no, again, guarantee that the self is going to benefit. But if you reject the pain of faith outright, there will come no benefits, that is certain. And the reason why I called it an absurdist exercise is not to make fun of the practice, it's because it is absurd. Look again at the thing of the apple. It is absurd to give something of you, something so great like your freedom, for example, with no guarantee you will get something bad. It is the definition of something that is absurdist, but it doesn't make it bad, because by way of this absurd exercise, the consequences are usually attached to a reward, which is the reason why you are faithful. You are not faithful for the sake of being faithful, or if you are, you lost sight of what being faithful means. You are faithful because it comes with benefits to you and to the people around you, to the society. You will see that the version of faith that Nietzsche decries is the type that lost sight of that because it detests pain. The type of religion or cult that still conserves faith but no pain attached to it doesn't really have faith, because faith withers away again and dies if it is just reward. You know that. Sacrifices are necessary in life. You cannot get something for nothing. So the idea that you could endure painless faith and get something in return is ridiculous. But that's the way we function nowadays in modern society. That's most religions. Most religions have been watered down so much nowadays that we got rid of all of the bad stuff, the icky stuff that apparently doesn't align with morals or can be offensive, and we kept the rest. But because we did that, we don't have religions anymore. We have empty shells. And if you look at religions that Nietzsche doesn't mention, Islam, for example, that always refuse to do that, they maintain purity. Likewise for Christianity. There are branches of Christianity that I'm personally not privy of, but I'm certain exist, where this refusal to just ditch pain has been installed, and therefore they kept religion the way it was supposed to be. Now, this again was faith as it used to be, which means again also that modern men, because they have lost the blueprints of this internal struggle between the self and the self, have lost the meaning of religion. It's the reason why so many people nowadays, even quote-unquote religious people, are not really religious deep down. Their faith is flimsy. It has no value. Why? There is no struggle. They have fled from the struggle. Faith is the struggle itself. It's the struggle against your innate nature. And it's why also so many people have lost sight of the allegorical value of religions. It's the reason why if you put the Bible or the Quran or the Torah or the even any Buddhist text in the hands of someone, a modern man, he will read it and he will tell you that this is nonsense because he reads it literally. He refuses to see a hidden meaning. So if symbolism is taken out of religion, then it's not religion anymore. It's something completely different. You cannot read religious text with the same mindset you would have when you read the newspaper. But many people don't know that. And Nietzsche utilizes the image of God on the cross to represent that. Because God on the cross is also something that could be seen as an allegory. It's the allegorical representation of an illogical choice, of illogical acceptance. The Son of God, which in reality is God, a part of God, of the Holy Trinity, allowed himself to be crucified on the cross on purpose, so again as to spread his message, so as to come back afterwards and make a dent and make a change. This was, if you look at the possibilities that were available, it wasn't really logical, right? Because you could ask yourself, well, if you have unlimited power, why did you allow mere humans to best you? Well, it was because God on the cross means something. It's not just someone who got crucified and then he died and was resuscitated and then came back. If you just look at it like this, of course religion makes no sense. Nietzsche tells you that it is this ability to go beyond a figurative event and look at what it means as a metaphor that allows you also to understand why accepting faith as an absurdist practice also will make sense. It's because the religion is, in a sense, centered around the absurd. I hope I don't offend you when I say this, but every religious text is absurd. But it's absurd for a reason. It's because it's trying to get you to accept this absurdity in your life. Because faith is absurd by itself. And because we have lost sight of it, and now we just look at religion as something stupid and that makes no sense, we have also lost sight of what we have done to it. We cannot take into account what religion has become if we cannot see or know what it used to be and what we've made of it, what the modern sensitivity has made of religion. And because of that, there has been what is described as a transvaluation of all ancient values. Everything that used to exist in the past, we now see through the modern lens and we don't understand it. I'm sure that you've witnessed that, where people look even like 300 years ago and they say things like, oh, this was so antiquated and I can't believe people are so barbaric. Why? It's because they don't understand time periods. Their view of the world and history is anachronical. They are incapable of understanding things allegorically, so they don't understand things at all, even in their everyday lives. And this is the transformation that Nietzsche describes. It's the reason why there is a clear before and after when it comes to religion. And there is one portion, the before, that Nietzsche had nothing against. What he detests is the after. An after that I called the after Christ, because I think it's fairly fitting. Just like we had before Christ and after Christ, we have the after Christ. But that is going to be for part 3. What I want to point out here is this. This transvaluation also happened at the birth of Christianity, and it happened for every single religion, meaning that even again, for calendar, we say that the birth of Jesus Christ is the start of the time. We start counting years starting from his birth. Why? Why didn't we start 10 years before? Well, it's because there is significance to his birth. There was a transmutation of the world when he was born. So this is why we are doing things this way. And it's interesting to notice that the entirety of the world does it. Meaning that even countries that used to be Christian and are now atheist, or non-Christian countries also follow suit, because the entire world felt that transvaluation. But with transvaluation comes also a change of morals, a change of setting. And this needs to be pointed out. Too many people refuse to point it out, but if you don't, and you just accept Christianity as something that has always existed, then you sort of lose its value. You lose sight of its value. You lose sight of Jesus' sacrifice. You lose sight of everything that makes Christianity great. So it's something to keep in mind. Because this ideological struggle of the self against its alienation, which is the faith already described, was something of this ancient world. It is something that nowadays is mostly absent. And it's what kept it vibrant, by the way. And what was it replaced by? Well, it was replaced by a stagnating counterpart, something that doesn't move forward but doesn't really move backward at all, that Nietzsche describes as fruit of the Oriental slave. Now, you could look at the term slave as just literal, meaning literal slaves, but it's also people who are just metaphorical slaves, meaning that they are captors of their own mind or they are captors of society. We're mostly going to focus on the first meaning because in the understanding of religion by Nietzsche, you will see that he perceives Christianity as having been perverted by a certain group of people, and that group of people is the slaves, because slaves were Christian. Meaning that it wasn't a religion that was reserved to the aristocrats. Everyone became Christian. That also includes the lower caste of society. And to Nietzsche, these same people that completely lacked the fighting power to actually try to challenge the established order used religion as a weapon to get back at their masters. And the way they did it is very simple. To get back at their masters, to take revenge against the Roman master, they did the exact same thing. They transmutated, which used to be faith that was ingrained in the Christian religion, and they turned it into a non-faith, into an absolute. Now, How do we make sense of that? Well, first off, you have to accept one thing. Even if you refuse to accept the fact that religions were created by men, what you cannot deny is that they are modified by him. Meaning that even if religions were dictated by God and the Bible, the Quran, were really the handiwork of God through the prophets, you know that the text evolve. You know that the interpretation of the text evolves. Sometimes things are even added to the text. By whom? God? No, by us, by humans. And that's important to keep in mind, because this means that even if religion was pure to start with, it can be corrupted. If you refuse to accept it, your religion will become corrupted, and you will turn a blind eye because you will be so focused on trying to keep it pure that you will fail. And that is even more dangerous if you let it happen to you. If your faith starts becoming corrupted because you refuse to accept that your own heart could be turned, which it can, and that's exactly what happened. As an ideological weapon, the religion of Christianity was adapted to a slave type of morality. It was transmutated and it turned into a non-faith. A non-faith, as I said, that is an absolute. What does it mean? Well, what faith used to be was, in reality, also freedom from the faith, because as I told you, it was a constant battle. So you had faith, but you're also always free to decide to move away from the faith, which paradoxically also made it stronger. If I make you join a club and you don't have a choice, you have to stay in the club, how high are the chances of you actually wanting to be in the club, of you actually being implicated in the club, of trying to further the power of the club? It's very low, because you are constrained. Whereas if I give you freedom, maybe the club will have less people in it, but the people in it will be in it for the long term, because they actually want to be there. The slaves could not tolerate that. The slaves could not tolerate the idea that some people could just escape from the faith. They wanted the faith to be as absolute as possible. And what does that mean? If you want to just remove the choice of the believer, what do you have to do? Well, you have to remove the absurdity. It's the reason why religions nowadays take themselves so seriously. It's counterintuitive, because you could think, okay, but to keep a religion stable and to make sure it's not attacked, you have to be serious about that. Yes, I agree to an extent, but you have to understand also that if you are not also in capacity of pointing out certain aspects of your religion that don't make sense, how are you to point out the aspects that might have been corrupted by someone else? Because keep in mind that you are the inheritor of a religion that has been passed down for hundreds of thousands of years, and you are facing the very real possibility that aspects of this religion were manipulated by men and were not directly dictated by your God. And you should be able to notice them. And to be able to notice them, you have to have a spirit for absurdity, a spirit to also accept the fact that your submission, your acceptation to something that is, in a sense, so vaporous is a little bit strange, a little bit ill-advised, but it doesn't make it bad. But that is what created the revolt of the slaves. The Romans, especially the Roman aristocracy, which had become Christian, had a certain level of distance with the practice, meaning that they were not all in. They were questioning it. They had a smirk on their face as they practiced the code. And the slaves and their sensibilities just couldn't handle that. So this is what caused what Nietzsche calls the slave revolt. The slave revolted. Why? Because he can only tolerate the tyrannous. And that's almost funny to an extent, because you could think that the first person that would want to question would be the slave, because he himself questions his condition as a slave. Why am I a slave? Why is he the master? But no, you see, in his condition as someone who was lower, the slave had no other choice but to make use of religion and just shape it the only way he knew. And that's the difference again between slave and master morality that is more developed in other books. But it's almost genetic. When you listen to Nietzsche, it's almost like there are certain people whose set of moralities and whose set of even genes are going to direct them towards certain types of thinking patterns, and others will go towards other horizons. So that's what created the entire revolt. And you could ask me, okay, but how does that work? How does the weak revolt against the strong using religion? Well, you see, it's very simple. What they did is they took religion, and from religion, they removed all of the aspects that did not align with them. They made religion after their own image. And what did religion become? The religion of the weak. And it's something that we see with Christianity, where the last will be the first. The weak will have his reward in heaven. The strong, if he abuses his power, will be punished. Who created that? What is that sensibility? Who could use this? Well, someone who doesn't have any other choice, who is reduced to a state where his only weapon is to turn around the very morality that dictates that he must suffer, because that is what the slaves hated more than anything else. It's that original acceptance of suffering, and also, therefore, faith. Faith is the acceptance of struggle. Slaves didn't want to struggle, they wanted to be freed from their struggle. So they did away with everything that they saw as standing in their way. And as I said, paradoxically, it also means that they embraced a form of tyranny, the tyranny over their own self and over others, which led to these immovable beliefs, these beliefs that we still have to this day, where you are not allowed to question things, because to the slave, the unconditioned is the only liberty he tolerates. Isn't that amazing? Someone whose entire life is dictated by his masters and who is shackled by chains, when he tries to find a way out of the chains, in reality, just jumps into a new set of one. He goes from the chains into a net. And that is, in a sense, the human condition, right? We never truly attain liberation. We attain liberation from a certain evil just to jump into the arms of another. True liberation is rare. So this is why, again, as according to the author, and I quote, "Even in morals, he loves as he hates without nuance." This is this black and white state of morals that we inherited. This is, again, this black and white state of the world where it's this way, not that way, and there is no place for gray. That is something that we inherited from religion, or at least what religion had become. If you look at, again, pre-slave morality religion and what had happened after the revolt, you see that one is much more complex than the other, and one is also much more in tune with what it should be, and that is the ancient version. The version where faith was in the play, where there was a questioning going on, not one that is so rigid that it loses all meaning. But it's something I'm going to explain in more details. Because this entire revolt of the slaves was caused by enlightenment, and that also is strange. Why would enlightenment lead to revolt? Well, it's because the slaves became conscious of their own chains. They were shown that it wasn't right that they were enslaved. And I'm not agreeing, and I'm not arguing against that. And Nietzsche himself is not doing that. He's just saying that it seems as if knowledge was the reason why there was a revolt in the first place, which aligns directly also with a Christian lecture of knowledge as a whole. What pushes Adam and Eve out of paradise is the fact that they consumed the fruit of the arbre, French, of the tree of knowledge. This is the reason why. They lost their innocence, and in a sense, they lost their faith. They lost their complete belief in God. They doubted God, because if they trusted God, they would have told the snake, no, we don't need to do anything. God knows everything, we can just rely on him. But because they are humans, they wanted knowledge for themselves, and therefore they were, again, banished from heaven. And we are, according to Christians again, the descendants of these people. Again, if you look at this as something purely figurative, you'll think, well, that makes no sense because genetic this and evolution that. But if you look at it metaphorically, that's exactly what Nietzsche is saying here. The gained awareness of their lowly position as slaves, just like Adam and Eve might have started to understand that they were subservient to God, was made intolerable, because once you realize that you're being dominated, now you cannot take it anymore. It happens with children. Children engage a rebellious stage because they come to understand that they have to obey to their parents. But they obey to their parents their entire life. So why don't they rebel when they're 5? Well, it's because they don't get that they're being dominated. And also, they don't mind it. They start to mind it when they try to claim independence. They clamor for their own liberation, and that's what leads to struggle. That's what leads to the trouble with the teenagers. But here, it was mostly caused again by the fact that the noble taste, the taste of the aristocrats, seemed to deny suffering, and nothing could be worse for the slave. The slave didn't mind suffering. What he hated, however, is the fact that the master that made him suffer so refused to accept it in the first place. And it's something you see still to this day. Well, people will suffer from ailment or handicap, and they will be more upset at the fact that people don't give enough empathy or sympathy rather than about the pain itself. So it's a trait that is deeply ingrained in humans. And of course, it must be extremely annoying, but you have to understand one thing. The aristocrats themselves applied that to themselves, which is the reason why there were aristocrats in the first place. This is something that I know is tough to grasp because we have our modern understanding of aristocracy, or we see them as parasites and people who are not worthy, but keep in mind that these people got in positions of power for a reason, meaning that at some point one of their ancestors was above the rest, and then they inherited that. So maybe they're not worthy, but their ancestors were. And I'm going to guess that the ancient Romans were of that ilk. So they themselves didn't mind suffering in them, but they possessed the strength to endure it. The slaves didn't. And it goes back to the sort of cryptic message of Nietzsche that says, one value for a man is poison to another. That resilience and refusal to see pain as something bad works when you're strong. But apply that to someone who's weak and you will break them down. The weak want to be babied. They want to be, in a sense, cajoled and protected from pain. They don't want you to smile at them and tell them, yes, your suffering is well merited. That's something that they detest. So that's the revolt, and that's the gist of the revolt also. Both in Stoicism, which we covered in length, and the ancient faith, pain was seen as natural and therefore must be accepted. This a slave cannot accept because his life is nothing but pain. And also, it sort of justifies his life, right? Because the ancient mindset, the ancient faith stated that if you are a slave, it's because you are inferior. So your nature aligns with your social conditions, you have nothing to complain about. The aristocrat dominates you because he is naturally, innately better than you. Of course, you cannot accept that. But how do you change things? If you in reality truly lack the capacity to challenge the aristocrat, well, you have to find a different way. You have to modify your social status. And how do you do that? You inverse things. You start saying that people who are oppressed are the real heroes, and the people who oppress are the villains. This is the transmutation of values, of morals, and the destruction of faith that Nietzsche describes. And that is what starts the morality revolt. A slave insurrection fought without weapons that was initiated, and here it fucking comes, prepare yourself, by the Jews. Now, if you read the text, you will see that too, meaning that there is a paragraph where you read it and you're happy, and suddenly, out of the blue, Nietzsche is like, it's the Jews. It's fairly common with authors of the past, meaning that all of your favorite authors were anti-Semitic with big quotation marks, meaning that they criticized Jewish people. They criticized the court, they criticized the morality that came with it. Nowadays, it's completely unacceptable because we're post-World War II, and therefore they endured so much suffering that I guess you can't really question anything anymore. But you have to understand one thing. This was pointing out as religion, so Judaism, and what it led Christianity to. So in a sense, it's also a critique of Christianity and of every religion that came afterwards, because Christianity came after Judaism and it took a lot from that religion. So I hope it's not something that is going to make you recoil as you read it. It's just part of the text, and it's interesting because if you try to understand the mindset, and you're trying to understand why Nietzsche believed that all of that slave morality was in reality engineered and started by Jewish people, the explanation actually makes quite a lot of sense. He describes them as a people born for slavery. Meaning that if you look at the history of Jewish people, they were enslaved for large portions of their history. Why? Because they were a people that lacked the strength to protect themselves. And it's relatively still true nowadays, meaning that before the apparition of Israel, Jewish people lacked the ability to protect themselves with military power. So they were just slapped around. It's sort of the entire existence of their religion on earth that really can be summed up to tribulations. They go from country to country, and whatever happens in the country happens, and if they get expelled, it's usually violent, and they go to another country. An actual strong and resourceful people on pure physical strength wouldn't have to endure all of that, which again, I'm not going to get into politics right now, but it's the reason why Israel was such a wish. It's because what I'm describing right now is perfectly understood by Jewish scholars and rabbis. They understand that they were in need of something to be able to protect their people. They were lacking in protection. They couldn't rely on other countries to provide that protection. So, because they were deeply aware of their past and their enslavement throughout history, they had to come up with something. But back in the days, that something wasn't weapons. That something was an inversion of valuations. If you are the slave and you again lack physical power or the power of weapons or of number, what is your last recourse? Your last recourse is spirituality, it's morality, it's what happens up there. And the best way, again, to flip the script on your opponents is to engage in an inversion of valuations, where poor means rich and reproaches towards human existence abound. So, this resentment towards this world, this earth, and nature is, according to Nietzsche, again, something that was created way before Christianity, way before the slaves of the Roman period. It was created by the human condition and what happens when a group of people is oppressed and therefore inferior. They have to come up with a solution, and that solution was slave morality. Now you come to understand why Nietzsche despises it. It's not that he hates the Jews or that he hates Christianity, it's that he dislikes the response. If you were to listen to Nietzsche, he would tell you, hey, if you're being oppressed, get strong and become the oppressor. But don't try to flip the script by completely poisoning morality. This also aligns with the idea that apparently some people don't really have a choice, so you can't really hate them. If some are born with the ability to develop an aristocratic taste, this must mean that some are going to be born with a more plebeian allegiance. And this is what leads to, again, this historical and theological reading of morality that includes religions. And again, is incredibly politically incorrect, but I think is on the money. It makes a lot of sense. And this has, by the way, developed skepticism. Skepticism towards suffering that is present in most religions, where suffering is not looked at with a very permissive eye. It's something that must be avoided at all costs. And it's also what leads to a certain detestation of this world. It's the reason why many religions came up with an afterlife. It's because it's to justify all of the pain you're going to endure now. If you were to believe that after this life there is nothing and your life is nothing but pain, well then it's unfair, right? Why are you going through so much for no payback and no reward? Well, it's because the struggle is the reward, the pain is the reward. But if you refuse to accept that, you are going to start believing that your real existence will come afterwards, which by definition will also mean that you are going to detest your existence. You're going to be very resentful. And that resentfulness is what characterizes religions nowadays, something we're going to be seeing in episode 2, I believe. So, again, with this skepticism towards, again, the acceptance of suffering that contradicts the skepticism towards suffering itself that was aristocratic morality that regarded pain as something normal, this gave birth to revolutions because, again, if you want to modify morals and values, something has to happen. It has to be done through a certain level of effort. And this is something that verifies itself throughout history because it's this, in a sense, refusal to accept what can be seen as natural inclinations or natural occurrences of the human life that have led to what Nietzsche describes as a religious neurosis that looks at humans looks at our tendencies, looks at the natural inequality between them, and says that is unacceptable. We have to fix that. Every natural inclination needs to be contained, it cannot be exalted. And in Christianity, for example, it manifests itself under solitude, abstinence, and fasting. Practices put in place with the sole purpose of containing your natural inclinations. Is that a bad thing? No, but it's something that you must accept, because if you cannot accept it, you are going to lose sight of the purpose. Let's say that fasting is a good thing. It's something that is going to make you a better person. You have to question fasting. Why do you fast in the first place? Because if there is no meaning attached, you are just going to fast for no reason. Case in point, people during Ramadan, right now it's relevant, people fast. If you're Muslim, you're fasting. But why are you fasting? You should be able to tell me why. It's to get closer to God. It's to understand what it feels to be hungry. It's to feel pain. It's the acceptation of pain. But if you become resentful and you think, man, why do I have to suffer? Why can't I eat, right? Because of course, you would lose sight of pain as the reward. You wouldn't understand. If you start questioning the reason for your struggle, you're not going to be able to accept the struggle. You will lose sight of God, of your religion, and you're very likely to cheat on Ramadan. People who eat during Ramadan do it because they feel pain, they think it's unfair, so they think, hey, I should eat. That's the human in you speaking. That's the natural inclination that thinks, I deserve to eat right now. It's not normal for me to suffer. One that tries to be above that, to elevate himself, will accept this restriction. But he will accept it only because he understands its reasons. If you cannot tell if the temptation is the cause of the penance or its effect, you will be lost, because it might very well mean that, for example, you are going to fast, but because you don't know why, it's going to rebound into making you more gluttonous in the future, and you're going to end up losing the plot. You are going to not understand why you have to engage in penance in the first place. And it's the cause and effect I already described. I think this is clear. I know that it wasn't for me when I read it the first time. So let me give another example. If you practice sexual abstinence, you have to understand why you are engaging in such practice. Because it might very well be also that this abstinence will result in a rebound of your sexuality afterwards, which is something you see a lot with people who do nofap, for example. It's because they don't understand the principle to start with. All right, so this also points out to a human tendency that makes this topic so relevant, and that is a taste for extreme sensuality. By sensuality, I don't mean sex, I mean the senses, the tendency to feel things, to touch, to taste, to smell, etc., to enjoy. The problem with this extreme sensuality is that it has a tendency also to turn into word renunciation, meaning that we are subjected to such inclinations that it's very tempting to just reject them outright. But when we reject our temptations and portions, we also reject the word, because they are a part of us. The goal is to control them, it's not to cut them off, because it's impossible to cut them off. If you try, they will start to show up again in unexpected areas of your life, and you're not going to be able to control them. And that is, by the way, it's this confrontation between our nature and what we try to make it into that has created the religious crisis. What is the religious crisis? It's the acceptation that religion is abnormal, is unnatural, it is counter nature, but it's not necessarily bad. It is something that could be served as a way to control our nature. But that is still a crisis, because nature doesn't want to be controlled. And that is the mystery of the saint and of his will negation, where I'm going to end this episode by explaining to you why ancient faith and the way it was applied in Europe back then made sense, how it could align with a group of people that were vibrant and that were alive. They were alive. And it's important to say that, because nowadays most people who are religious are the exact opposite. They are dead, because they expect their life to start after the actual death, which is a mistake. Let me check the time. Okay, we are good. So let me recenter. We just finished with the question of the renunciation, the logic hidden behind the refusal to accept our natural instincts as they come to us. Now, let's see an application of it and let's see why it made sense. Let's see why logically it actually is something that can be understood. If you look at ancient Christianity during the medieval times, for example, kings, princes, knights, all of these very mighty men all bow down in front of God. They all bow down in front of the priest. Why? How does that make sense? Why would someone so strong just, again, allow himself to be dominated like this? Why would you, if you are a strong man, if you are a very masculine man, why would you humiliate yourself in front of God? What do you get from this? What is your faith doing for you? Where does it come from? Well, it comes from the mystery of the saint. It's an enigma, the enigma of voluntary privation. You are full of instincts, you are full of passions, and you ask yourself, what would it mean for me to renounce them? I am so exuberant. What would it mean for me to try to put a lid on that pot and try to retain the steam? Well, that is the question that mighty men have always asked themselves. They were fascinated by the idea that you could want to constrain yourself, that you could want to be a man that has restrictions that he imposes on his own self. This is why royalty at the time, even the mightiest warlords, all bow down in front of the priest. The weak, the disheveled, the frail priest that had them eat in the palm of his hand. How is that possible? Well, one, it's that inversion of values we already described. But here, it's not one that is entirely bad. Yes, it served the priest, but it also served the people that, again, renounced their domination over said priest. Because they saw in him something greater than their strength, and that is God, that is religion. Regardless of how vibrant you are looking at something that might be even more vibrant and that intrigues you. You want to learn more. It puzzles you also in a sense. But you have to keep in mind that back then it was even stronger because you are born in a religious world. You might have been born in your religion. Imagine the discovery of God by someone who never knew it. Imagine what it did for a man who thought he was a god on earth because he was dominating, he was a warlord, no one could oppose him. Imagine how humiliating it must have been to realize that he was at the end of the day nothing. That is the power of faith. That is why men who had the strength to ravage churches, to cut priests in half with one swing of their axes, bowed the knee. They were puzzled. They saw something that excelled in front of their eyes that they didn't have. It was that will to know will. It's an invention I just created. It sounds terrible, but it's simple to understand. The will to know will. Having willingness directed towards having no will. The renunciation of the word. That takes tremendous power of the mind. And that, of course, for men of the past who were all about their instinct, was fascinating. It's something that they couldn't quite understand because it was so opposed to their own will to power. The will to power that told them dominate, conquer, extend the self always, and they're faced with something that is the exact opposite, which is also the reason why faith back in the days, and that's the kicker, was also based on will to power. Why did the king bend the knee in front of God? Because he thought, man, I have my firepower strength, I have my warrior's strength. What if I could make the strength of God my own? What if I could align this spirituality with this physical power and prowess? Well, that's exactly what happened. God, the power of God is faith. Faith is the absolute belief in something greater than you that elevates you. The humiliation only works for a time, and it's something that people who are not religious don't understand. Look at Islam, look at Christianity. Why do people bend the knee? Why do they pray on mats? Why? What is the point? It's because you accept the existence of something greater, which removes the ceiling. You now have no limits because you are following the greatest chief possible. It is creating an entity of such power that if you are to put yourself at its service, you yourself have unlimited power. This explains so many things. It explains, for example, the Crusades. Look at the Crusades. How do you think Christian soldiers, Christian knights, les chevaliers, how do you think they managed to fight 1 against 100? Is it just because they were very strong? No, it's because they had absolute faith in their mission. This was the power that the strong, the mighty seeked. It was their will to power that told him, hey, there is something enigmatic and cryptic in this God, in this faith. And if we make it our own, we are going to become even stronger. You also have to keep in mind that superior forces always search for their match. That is always true. A man of strength will always look for other men so that he can expand and test his own strength. What happens if you're king? Who can you look at that is stronger than you? Well, there's only one person, God. And God is represented by who? The priest. So it was also, in a sense, also will to power. A will to power that cannot accept it's the pinnacle. And that's the paradox of will to power. You could think, oh, will to power, so it's like world domination. No, it's not as simple. Will to power is a never satiated envy and just thirst for more. And that more came in the figure of God. God is infinite, right? You can never consume God enough that you will digest him. It's not possible. He is the never-ending dish. And it's something that, for men of the time who had such character and strength, was incredibly attractive. And that's the reason why also God constituted one that they could never hope to beat, something that they couldn't help but respect. There was a power there that Nietzsche still points out as absurd, because again, take the axe and cut the priest in two. Is God going to stop it? Maybe, maybe not, but it doesn't matter. What matters is that they believed in it, and that is faith. That is the importance of faith. Because it takes will to have none. So in the figure of the priest, these men recognized their own honor, and so by honoring the priest, they honored themselves. By refusing to use their bestial power to just eradicate the presence of the priest and therefore the presence of God, they also, in a sense, accepted that there were things outside of their control that they could learn from and that they were going to ally with to obtain that strength. This is will to power. Is also the reason why will to power cannot be reduced to just big muscles or being the strongest or being an alpha. That is just surface level. It goes so much deeper than that. Will to power is the ultimate will and ultimate necessity for humans to always go further, to always expand. That, of course, we cannot understand nowadays because it took the form back in those days of voluntary humiliation in the face of God. This is what made faith the ultimate sacrifice. You were willing to give everything to God, knowing that the power he would give back to you was much greater. But of course, modern men cannot understand that. It makes no sense for someone who's a modern man. Why? Because modern men are mediocre to start with. Faith only makes sense to someone who is strong, because if you are going to humiliate yourself in front of a higher figure, it must mean that humiliation is a rarity for you. But if your life is constantly a cycle of humiliation, and you constantly bow the head, and you're constantly afraid, like a modern man, therefore religion loses its shine, because it's another fucking Thursday. You're constantly humiliated. So why are you going to humiliate yourself in front of a fictional character that doesn't exist? Well, it's because they don't get it. They don't see the power of humiliation, of self-subjugation. It must also be said that they are subjugated by so many things to start with on the side, like government, the laws, morality, that there's not much space for self-subjugation. They have already so many leashes around their neck that there is no place for a Christian cross. There is no place for a Star of David. There is no place for whatever Muslims wear around their necks. I'm not privy to that. There is no place for the hand of God on their shoulders. And that is the reason why I think that by doing that, by explaining to you the concept of faith as it used to be, I've proven that Nietzsche doesn't hate religion. He doesn't hate Christianity. He hates what it became. He saw the absurdity of faith and he saw great power in it. Accepting to sacrifice your own will to power to attain a greater one with no actual guarantee it's going to happen is absurd, and yet it occurred. And it's something that is verifiable. So, this is going to end this video. This is the explanation as to faith as to renunciation, all of the logic behind it. It is the ultimate sacrifice. It is becoming humble. But the problem is that nowadays people are already humbled by their condition, and therefore they lost any ability to create a bond with God. This is a topic and a theme we are going to see next week, because this was presenting mostly the history of the ancient religion, what faith was, what it became, and I sort of put in place all of the players and the mechanisms so as to explain to you next week what happened. Because I sort of painted the start of the devolution and of the regression of the Christian faith. And next week I'm going to do a full expose explaining to you exactly what Nietzsche has seen, what he has diagnosed. And then in part 3, after the death of God in a post-God modern war, in an after Christ, we are going to speak about what it did. We are going to speak about our present existence that is devoid from the existence of God, mostly devoid from faith, and therefore devoid of most value. Thank you for watching. Have a good day.